Welcome. This is the first video in a multi-video series teaching you how to play Mark H. Walker's 85 Afghanistan Graveyard of Empires. 85 is part of the Squad Battle series, so if you know about this series, a lot of this information is going to feel very familiar to you. In this video, I'm going to teach you about sequence of play, the difference between turns and impulses, scenario setup, and also the player impulse. The other videos in this series will teach you more about movement, combat, fortifications, the different units, and those sort of things. But this video is meant to get you started and get you set up and learning how to play. Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Is a card-driven and also scenario-driven game. So in order to get started with this game, you're going to want to turn to page 24 of the rules book. This is where the scenarios start. I'm going to walk you through setup for the very first scenario in this game, Kill Zone. Okay, let's walk through some scenario setup. I'm on page 24 of the rule book, which is where the scenarios begin. And we're going to start with the first one, Kill Zone. Every scenario has a blurb at the beginning that describes why the scenario is the way it is and kind of gets you in the mindset and the theme of what's going on. So to set up this scenario, you're going to want to look at this picture. This is going to tell you what maps to draw out. 85 comes with 5 geomorphic maps, and this scenario, Kill Zone, uses 3 of them. So down here in the corner, you see 6, 7, and 8. So I've already laid those out on the table. I have them going, instead of this way, I have them going perpendicular to this picture, just for the space that I have with the table that I have. So here are the maps I have set up. Here is 6, 7, and 8. Like I said, setting it up this way just worked better for my table. Right, we have the map set up. Let's look at some of the special rules and some of the setup. The game ends when the Soviets destroy their 5th Mujahideen unit. Turn ends when the 3rd intern is drawn. So like I mentioned later in the video, the number of interns drawn are going to determine when the scenario ends. So this is going to be a turn ends when the 3rd intern is drawn. Now we're going to look at the setup for the units. The Mujahideen, they're going to set up second in a hex that provides a clear modifier and is not co-located or adjacent to a Soviet unit. We get 3 RPGs, 2 RPDs, 3 rifles that are concealed, Arash and Badar, which are going to be leaders. The Mujahideen friendly board edge is east. So that is important to orient this to the map that you've set up. Next, we have the Soviets. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out all of these units and set it up. So what you're going to do is you're going to refer to this rule book and look at the counters that come with the game, punch those out and set them up where they tell you to on the board. All right, before I move on, let me go ahead and show you the Mujahideen units that I've punched out. We have the 3 RPGs. We have the 2 RPDs. We have Arash, Badar. We have our 3 rifles. Remember, this is a squad level game. And then we have the concealed markers that we're going to use for those rifle squads. They could sit on top of the counter like that. Okay, now I'm going to get out the Soviet units and show you those. All right, so I went ahead and punched out all of the Soviet units. Before we move on, I wanted to go ahead and point out a couple things. So here we have the Soviet units that are listed at the top of the page that you're going to need for this scenario. Something different here is that we have 2 rifle squads of marksmen, 1 rifle squad of intensive fire, and 2 rifle squads of prep fire. Okay, those words in parentheses are the powers that they have. So not every rifle squad is the same. So these are all of our rifle squads. I accidentally got out 2 of the intensive fire, which I don't need. So the powers are going to be listed right here, the symbol that is in the center of the bottom, okay? Now, if you want to know which power is which, you need to flip to the back of the rule book. It's pretty handy. And those are all the powers that are listed. So that one I just pointed at with the rifle symbol is the marksman. In this scenario, we also needed intensive fire. You can see those bullets there. And then we also needed prep fire. So that's important when you are getting out your units. Make sure you get out the correct counters with the correct powers listed in the bottom center of the unit. Okay, now that we have all of our units out, we can set them up. I'm going to let you guys be creative with how you want to set them up. I don't want to influence your own strategy and decisions, but First, in this scenario, the Soviets are going to set up first on any road hex of map 7. That's going to be this middle map here, and any of these with the road, that's where you're going to set up. Now, don't forget that all of your leg units in this scenario must be loaded in a GAZ 66. Don't laugh if I said that wrong. BTR 70 or BMP 1. So remember, they need to be loaded in those vehicles. You can refer to page 8 of the rules to see about transporting units and the different rules for unloading and loading different units on transporting vehicles. Okay, after the Soviets have set up, the Mujahideen can set up. They can set up in a hex that provides a cover modifier and is not co-located or adjacent to a Soviet unit. So that's going to be up to you. These decisions are highly strategic and a lot of fun to make. Please don't forget to refer to all of the scenario special rules. These are going to change scenario to scenario. In this one, the Mujahideen have the initiative on the first turn. That means you won't have to bid for initiative on this initial turn, but moving forward, you will. And then go ahead and refer to the rest of these. The victory condition cards are not used, so that's going to be important as well. For the event cards, I'm going to show you guys how to shuffle the deck initially for the beginning of a turn. And these event cards are going to be important because they're not going to be in the initial deck. They're going to be shuffled in after the first players have had their hands dealt. So let me go ahead and get that set up. All right, so 85 and the whole squad battle series is a card-driven game, so it's really important that you get this right. I've removed all the bonus victory condition cards because we don't use that for this scenario. You will use them for future scenarios. Put them to the side. I also went ahead and took out the event cards. A really cool feature of this game is that the event cards are just blank, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. But each scenario will list what the events do with a number corresponding to it. For example, event number 1 is Soviet indecision. The Soviet player must immediately discard 2 cards from his hand. So that's great. It keeps down on the components and it keeps down on game setup because you're not constantly exchanging different event cards to put into the deck. You just have 4 blank ones, and then the scenario prescribes what each event means, and I think that that's really smart. I've also removed the end turns. I always over-enunciate that because it sounds like I'm saying end turn, but I'm saying end turn. Okay, and then the main deck has also been shuffled. So what you're going to do is you will deal out 4 cards for each player, and this is going to be their starting hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. And within that hand, there's going to be an example of all of the different things that they can actually do. Okay, once you've done that, you will reshuffle in the end turn and the event cards. But for the beginning of a turn, you're not going to do that. You're going to go ahead and have these cards drawn, and you'll have the end turn and the events taken out of the deck before you shuffle them back in, just at the beginning of each turn. Okay, now that I've walked you through scenario setup, we're going to go through the sequence of play and then also the order of play within an impulse. And we're going to talk about the difference between turn and impulse. Now let's go through sequence of play. You can follow along with me starting on page 5 of the rule book. To understand sequence of play, you're going to need to know the difference between what a turn is and what an impulse is. A turn is going to be a series of impulses. So think of it as a bigger idea. The turn will actually end once a series of end turn cards have been drawn. I will show you what this is. That's going to be determined by the scenario. And impulses are going to be these shorter actions that alternate between players within a turn. So a turn is made up of smaller actions called impulses. And it's really important for you to understand the difference between what a turn is and what an impulse is. So the 5 steps within the sequence of play are to deal cards, determine initiative, alternate impulses, which we'll go into more detail in just a minute. 4th is the reserve phase, and lastly is the cleanup phase. So something new with 85 are the event cards. So in the first step in the sequence of play, which is to deal cards, you're going to remove all of the event cards and the end turned cards from the deck. You'll shuffle the deck and you'll deal each player 4 cards. You will then return the end cards and the event cards to the deck and shuffle them. The event cards will be activated when players draw them at the beginning of each impulse. So remember, shuffling the deck with the event cards and the end turn cards happens at the beginning of a turn, not an impulse. So at the beginning of the turn, you deal each player 4 cards, and then you shuffle in the end turns and the event cards. Like I said, the event cards will be triggered when you draw back up to 4 cards at the beginning of each impulse, and they will be discarded if they are drawn during resolving combat. Next in the sequence of play is determining initiative. Each player is going to look at the cards in their hands, and in the bottom left block is the targeting number. You're going to use this number to bid for initiative. The player with the higher number will win the initiative. In addition, they will also have to discard that card, the person who wins initiative. So the player who wins initiative and gets to go first will play with 3 cards for the first impulse. So this is a strategic way to play the game. If you want to go first, you're going to want to put down a card with a higher number, but you'll also be playing down a card. You might not want to go first, and you might want to have all 4 cards in your hand, so you might want to bid that lower number. Both players lay their initiative cards face down, and they reveal each card at the same time, and then determine who won initiative. Next, beginning with the player that won initiative, players alternate impulses, playing cards. I'm going to go into more detail about impulses after I finish going through sequence of play. But I do want to say that this is going to continue alternating impulses until both players pass consecutively or the number of scenario prescribed end turns are drawn. The 4th step in the sequence of play is the reserve phase. The player with the initiative may move all of their eligible units if they wish to in the reserve phase at the same time. Then the second player may do the same. Eligible units include reinforcements that are not yet on the map. For more details about the reserve phase movement, check out 5F on page 6. No cards may be played in the reserve phase, and no combat occurs in the reserve phase. The last part of sequence of play is the cleanup phase. Once the reserve phase is over, players will remove all fired, moved, and ops complete and barrage markers from their units. Shaken markers do stay in place. Smoke 1 markers are removed, and Smoke 2 markers are downgraded to Smoke 1. Both players discard all but 1 card in their hand if they want to, and they advance the turn marker. Combine the discard and the draw pile and begin as per step 5A. Remember that event cards that have been activated are removed from play and no longer shuffled into the deck. Okay, now that we've gone through sequence of play, let's zoom into the player impulse. The player impulse consists of 4 main steps. The first one is that the player draws up to 4 cards in their hand. The second is after drawing cards, the player plays action cards. Third is to resolve the action cards. And fourth is to discard up to 2 cards at the end of their impulse. Now let's zoom into each one of those 4 steps. So the first step is to draw up to 4 cards in your hand. Now it is important to draw 1 card at a time, because if you draw an event card, it might need to be resolved immediately. So you want to do this 1 at a time and not draw up to 4 and put them all in your hand at the same time. Nextly is to resolve any event cards that have been drawn. And then alternatively, a player may choose to pass, in which they do not draw any cards, they do not take an action, and they do not discard. After drawing cards, the player plays action cards, or just a card. The phasing player may play 1 action card and as many support cards as they wish of different names. The part 3 of a player impulse is to resolve the action cards. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this because I'm going to save that for part 2 of this video series. This first part is just to give you an idea and an overview of the flow of the game. So once a card is played, the phasing player designates the unit or units the card will activate. Examples of these cards are Fire, or Rally to remove a shaken marker, or Reconstitute a reduced unit. For more details on this rule, check out Rule 6C on page 7. Lastly, on the player impulse, the player may choose to discard up to 2 cards from their hand. This is obviously strategic because it increases your chances of drawing a more desirable card to your hand, but it also reduces the amount of reaction cards that you might have in your hand, which you could play on the other player's impulse. For example, if you were to be attacked, you might have a reaction card to their fire card. Thanks so much for watching part 1 of this series on how to play 85 Afghanistan Graveyard of Empires. We hope that this video gets you started with scenario setup and understanding the turn order and the impulse order of play. The next video we're going to have will go into more depth on some of the rules. We hope that these videos help you play our games more quickly and get your games on the table and enjoying them and having fun. Thanks again for tuning in. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks so much.